Welcome to the Inquisitive Analyst. I'm here to interview the one and only, my mother, Patricia Udokang. Hi, Mom.
Hi.
The reason why I've invited my mother to the show is because she has a huge history in business analysis. She's been working as a BA for many, many years, and she didn't start out doing that, but we're going to hear about her career adventures and the winding road that she walked on, and where she is now and what she's doing. She's still working at her age when she probably should be retired. But let's start off with your adventures. Now, we'll start with your life into the IT world, which was, maybe 40 some odd years ago. And you were transitioning from an editor. You were an editor at a publishing house, and you did that for quite a few years. And you decided there were no jobs in editing at one point, so you decided you were going to go into technology, IT, at a time when programming was Fortran, COBOL, and all that kind of stuff, SAS and whatnot. So you went to college after having gone to university years before, and you became a computer programmer. So we'll start with that point in your life. And you were at a company for quite a few years. First, what did you do in the company? Were you working in the help desk? What did you do?
My first job?
Yep, your first IT job.
My first IT job. I was a computer programmer. And about 3 days into the job, my supervisor said, gee, I noticed you have a teaching background. And he said, I really, really like the way you did your process flow diagrams. He said they were just phenomenal. So he said, I have a task for you. I said, oh, what's that? He said, well, in 3 weeks, I want you to teach CMS to everybody here. And I said, well, what's CMS? And he said, oh, it's the operating system on the mainframe. And I said, oh, okay, so I'm a newbie, and you want me to teach all these research people here how to use the computer? He said, yeah. Here's a manual, there's the terminal room, and in 3 weeks, you'll run a course for them.
And you did it.
And I did. I was actually amazed and pleased that I was able to do it, but in that 3-week period, I knew more about how that computer worked than any of them. So that started me on a career of not just programming, but of software support. Helping people. I was programming in SAS at the time, and the researchers were using SAS, and so I ended up supporting them and teaching as well.
Just to give an update, SAS is something like SQL. It's a third or fourth generation programming language, which means that you're not doing codes with zeros and ones and a number of very strange commands. It's almost human-like questions.
Well, SAS has, the main part of it is a data step, and there's some canned statements that you can work with, but you can also enhance it considerably. And then there are a number of procedures. For example, there's a print procedure, and there's an analysis procedure, and so on. And again, they all have their basic functions, but you can certainly enhance them so that you can get some more sophisticated reporting or whatever it is that you're interested in doing. And I mean, I did that for quite a while, and then Macintoshes came out. And my boss gave me a Mac to take home for Christmas. It was the first one that was ever available commercially. And so I had it sitting in the living room, and I told my children, don't touch it. It doesn't belong to Mommy. It belongs to the company. And I have to read the manual. And of course, I was one of these people who did read manuals from page 1 through to the end and tried everything out. And so I was preparing dinner one day, and I looked around, and there was my 5-year-old daughter on the Mac. I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm drawing. I said, drawing what? So I went over to take a look, and she had paint open, and she was drawing. I said, how did you get there? Well, I just turned it on and started working with it. And I thought, well, how difficult can this be? If my 5-year-old can figure out how to turn it on and find paint and then play with it. So I was quite excited. And besides, it was in color. The mainframe was never in color. But I ended up in time going to Algonquin College and asking them if they needed anybody to teach Microsoft courses.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
So you got a job teaching at Algonquin College, computer
Yeah.
programming. What did you teach there?
I taught SAS. I went there asking if they wanted help with courses in Microsoft, but they said, well, we see that you have a SAS background, and we use SAS in the administration area, and we'd really like to be able to recover some of our cost if we could offer a course in the evenings. And could you do that? And I said, sure, I could do that. So I wrote them a course, and it ran for quite a long while, every Wednesday night. And we had a lot of different people from different walks of life learning how to program in SAS.
Now, you worked at Algonquin College teaching in Ottawa, which is where we grew up. And you also worked at this full-time job. The Algonquin College job was only part-time, like you said, once a week. Eventually, this job you were at had its time. It was time to leave. You had been laid off, and now you wanted a change.
Right.
And you decided to do, what did you do after that?
Well, I'll tell you, that experience of being laid off on my 50th birthday was quite a shock. I had never been laid off in my life, and I had 3 young children, and to support, and my husband, of course, and was there, and I thought, how am I going to continue? But I decided to take a look at my skill set. What can I do? I thought, well, you've got a background in teaching, you've got a background in computers, you spent several years in the publishing business, producing books, and I thought, surely I can bring that all together to do something. So I decided I wanted to teach people how to use the computer, how to use software.
Now, this is vitally important, because many people go through a stage in their life when they feel that what's next? I've been laid off, or maybe you've decided to leave a job for whatever reason, and maybe you feel that you don't have the skill sets to move on to something else like business analysis, for example. And in the case of my mother, obviously, she was looking back at the soft skills that she had, the transferable skills, and that's what she brought to the next job.
Yeah.
And what was the next job?
Well, the next job was here in Calgary. It started in Winnipeg, but after a month in Winnipeg, they asked me if I could come to Calgary. So it was teaching, and teaching things like WordPerfect and Lotus 123 and all those wonderful things. And after about a year, I went to the sales manager and I said, if I teach another WordPerfect course, I'm going to slit my throat. And she said, what's the matter? I said, the materials are so poorly written. And she said, well, why did you write your own materials? I said, well, can I? And I thought these came from head office and I had to use them. She said, well, for heaven's sake, write your own materials. So then she also said, do you know anything about Remedy? I said, well, I know they use it in the outsourcing centers, but I don't really know anything about it. And she said, well, I want you to go over there and spend a week. And she said, ask them hundreds and hundreds of questions, talk to everybody, different job levels and so on. Find out what it is that they do, what their job is, how they do it, why do they use Remedy to do that job. And then I have a project for you.
Now, this is interesting that you bring this up, because you're talking about understanding processes, understanding how people, the ways of work, how people do things. Yeah. And so you had to talk to stakeholders face to face, you had to interview them, and you had to see exactly what it is they were doing. Exactly. I had to figure out what their requirements were for the different types of jobs that they were doing. What were the requirements for not just their jobs, but what it is that they're actually doing, and how do they go about doing it. So I did that, and she put me on training. I didn't go on the training, sorry. She asked me to train people on how to use Remedy, and that they had started a program where anybody who was going to be working in the outsourcing center had to go through this course. It started out as 3 days,
And I expanded it to a full week because I ended up including, which I thought was even more important, was all the processes that they were working with. You know, what was a work order process? What did they have to do in order to manage that process? How did they use the software? What was it about the software that would allow them to use that or to effect that process? And so there was work order management, change management, problem management, incident management, and I ended up writing documentation on all of this, but that became the proprietary information. And as a matter of fact, I found out couple of years later that all my material for those processes and for all the courses I was now writing and teaching there had been translated into Portuguese because there was a project going on in South America and they needed some information, they needed some documentation, they needed some course material. And so they asked if they could have it, and I said, well, who are you? You know, and this is all proprietary information. But I found out that they were indeed members of the company, and we got permission to allow them to go ahead and do that. That was quite an exciting thing to find out. And a few years later, when I was working with a different company, an American company, I met the people who had called me that time about that material, and they showed me the Portuguese translations on their computers. So that was all quite exciting.
Now, this is interesting because you said the next job you went to was an American company. Mm-hmm. You flew out of Calgary on a Monday. You worked in the States for Monday to Friday, and you flew back right on the Friday. And you held this job for quite a few years, and it involved remedy training.
I was the manager of training. So not only did I have to get certified in teaching remedy courses, which at the time the organization that owned the remedy software was called Remedy Corporation. And so I had to go down to the States and go through their training process and have them certify me so that I could teach their courses. Plus, I was allowed to then customize and teach whatever courses I wanted to teach for the various clients that we had. That was part of my job. The other part was to travel around Canada and try to get business for the American company. And that was an exciting time. I literally traveled not only throughout the States, but over to England. There was one time I was working, the client was a pharmaceutical company, and for 3 months I spent every second week in London, England. So I was flying back and forth across the ocean every single weekend, which was a little bit tiring, but very exciting.
I want to bring up the point of Remedy, because Remedy was a company that was purchased by Salesforce. So this Remedy software that you're using still exists today, even though you did this 22 years ago. And now the software is called Remedy Force. That's what Salesforce has rebranded it as. So it's still alive and well for the people who want to go into help desk software. This is certainly one option. The competitor for that now is called ServiceNow. So ServiceNow is a competitor for Remedy Force. They both do pretty much the same thing. And here you are, still talking about Remedy many years later.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. I had told that sales manager that from that day forward, I had never been bored a single day in the whatever job I was doing. But there was a lot of work around, requirement analysis when we were with a client, finding out what their business processes were, modeling those business processes. And over time, besides using Visio for modeling, over time I learned Eris a few years later, and ended up producing hundreds and hundreds of models in Eris, which is a more intelligent software for process modeling.
Yeah, I was going to mention, so maybe you want to describe what Eris does.
Well, Eris, you use it to build your processes, your business processes. But what's different with between it and something like Visio is that Visio is very static. But with Eris, every object you create carries data behind it. And so there are a lot of rules around how you work with the software so that you don't make serious errors. For example, one kind of error, if you don't copy something properly, you could destroy somebody else's model because the objects are shared amongst models. And I discovered that one day. I opened up a model I had created, and all of a sudden there was an object sitting there with a name that I didn't give it. And so I did some digging and found out that an individual had liked the object, and so they copied it and they changed the name of the object without doing it correctly. And as a result, all my models that had that object now had a different name to it. So I tried to find out who this person was and educate them a little bit on how to handle copying an object in the Eris. But I really enjoyed working with it, and it was much more complicated software for business process modeling than what Visio is at the time. But I rather liked the idea that it carries all this data. With every line you draw, every object you draw will have metadata behind it.
What I find interesting too, we can talk about, is after you did this job in the States, you came back to Canada, got a full-time job with another company here in Calgary, and that lasted for quite a few years until they officially retired you. And now you were leaving a full-time job position, and you became over time you became a consultant, which is what you're still doing today.
Right.
You work anywhere from a few months to a year or more, and sign a new contract and go from one job to the next, or one contract to the next. So over the past few years, the past 10 years, by the way, without getting any further, this young lady is 79 years old, and she's still working. She hasn't retired yet. So the last 10 years, what type of work have you been doing, apart from the Eris? You've done a lot of business process modeling.
Yeah, well, after I left the next company that I worked for after the American company, and during that time, I mean, I was working with Remedy again, and I was doing a lot of process modeling and a lot of redesigning of processes in order to make them more efficient. One, for example, we had a process for hiring contractors, and it took quite a few weeks in order to get from the beginning of that process to the end of that process, and there was obviously a bottleneck, and I managed to find out, of course, what that bottleneck was, and convinced management that if they would let me redesign the process, I could cut the whole hiring process down to less than 7 days, which they allowed, and I did.
And sometimes, if it's the story I think you're telling me, that one bottleneck just happened to be a signature by an executive, which could take a longer time.
Yes, because the executive was around a lot. The person was doing a lot of traveling. So one of my suggestions was that they give the director of the area more signing authority as far as the dollar amount that individual could sign on. And that helped get rid of that bottleneck.
Now, you've got some other interesting stories about business process modeling. One job you were in, you had to find out what the inputs and the outputs were from each stakeholder, and you found something interesting. You found that not all stakeholders, not all business analysts, not all users understood what came before, what came after their job.
Right.
Do you want to explain that a bit?
Yeah, that was such an interesting discovery, because I just couldn't fathom why anybody would not be interested in what was happening with the data before they handled it and what happened with that data when it left them. But I discovered there were a lot of people during the course of interviewing in order to build the business process, interviewing all the stakeholders involved in it. That's one of the things that I discovered, and I was quite surprised about that. But I think it was more with younger people. than with the older generation. It seems today that a lot of young people, they're sort of 9 to 5ers, and they come in and they push buttons and they go home. And and the whys and the wherefores behind pushing those buttons don't seem to be of much interest to some. I'm not saying all, of course, but to some. And it was always a great interest to me, so I found that a little odd. But yeah, that's.
Interesting. And what other intriguing adventures have you had? Let me try. I'm trying to think of some. Oh yeah. So sometimes you might have a manager that, maybe things are not working out, and in one case many years ago that happened to you, and that was probably one reason why you decided to move on to another job. And any advice to people who are transitioning from one job to another later in life, and they have questions about where do I stand now? What is it I do, and how do I get to the next step?
Well, you're talking about managing change, and I've always thought, that when one door closes, another door opens. And I think you need to be open to that. I think you need to take a close look at what it is that you're capable of doing. Not just your soft skills, but your practical skills in this day and age. What do you know about the computer, transferable skills, things that you learned in university. Sometimes you need to be doing some research, and if you were involved in doing any, research when you were in university, that skill becomes useful. So you need to take a look at what are you capable of doing, and find the opportunities that will help you move forward, because it's always a matter of growth. I feel that just because, as I've said, one door closes doesn't mean that there are no other doors that are going to open for you. And so you need to be adaptable. You need to be welcoming change, and not let it get you down. Some people might end up being depressed, which is certainly easy enough. If your financing is already restricted somewhat because of losing a job, maybe you even end up having to reconsider where you live. So I feel the best approach is to be positive, to look forward to whatever change is coming, and do the best you can, to find another opportunity. And I feel that I've never stopped growing from the time, I started out as a junior high and high school teacher, and I never dreamed that I would learn what I have learned over the last many decades. Certainly when I lived in Nigeria, I was asked if I would create an index for a book. Oh, okay, how hard can that be? So 3 books later, the director said, well, why don't you join us, and I'll train you on being an editor. And I thought, well, that sounds like fun, because I had an English background anyway. I taught English in junior high and high school. So I ended up being an editor, and while editing, I thought, well, the books are kind of boring in the design. And I have a graphic background, a graphic arts background, an artist background. I used to teach fine arts. And so I asked the director one day, do you think I could try and design one of these books? He said, sure, yeah, try your hand at it. So I spent as much time in the print, and this was the days for hot metal presses, no computers at all. And I went to the area where these people were building these pages, and watched intently how they changed the fonts, how they organized the characters. I had them doing all kinds of little tiny things for me so that I could see how this looked. And eventually, I wound up redesigning that book, and from that point on, they had me redesigning all the books because they liked the ideas that I had, I guess. And I even spent time learning how to fix a plate that had images on it, because there could be little spots that required touching up. And so I would go to the print shop and I'd sit there with the guys, and they'd give me whatever the ink or it is that they were using, and I would paint out all these little tiny spots so that everything would work. They didn't do color, you know, and so I had to do my own color separations. They didn't do colored photography at all, and so I had this big Stedler drawing table that the company bought for me, and one of the printers had produced a grid for me that had all these tiny little squares of, heavens, just a few millimeters apart, and I ended up doing color separation, layers and layers of plastic, a special plastic material, and ink, in order to work out where I wanted the colors to fall on not just the cover of the book, but on the interior of the book. So I learned all about how signatures work. You know, you take a great big piece of paper and fold it into the 32 or 8 or 16 page signatures, and open it up and find out, okay, where is the color that I want to put? Because I learned that if I put all the color on one side of the paper, it was cheaper than trying to put it on different pages. And it worked out, you know. You had all these different pages on one side of the paper. So it was an amazing experience, and that experience alone became part of the foundation for my ability to produce training materials later in life, you know, and to do all of the documentation that I did on those business processes. And eventually, I ended up in Calgary working with people on their standards in the oil industry, and so helping them format those standards. And everything that I learned back in Nigeria, where they had the hot metal presses, and where I just applied my design skills and my editing skills and able to produce a book, I was able to carry that forward right to today.
I was going to mention
so there's all kinds of skills that you can pick up in life, and you may not use them for a while, but they're not dormant. They're waiting to be used.
I was going to say a lot of the graphic work you did back then. Now software like Photoshop takes care of a lot of that.
It does, yeah.
So and it takes the length of time that you spent on those hours and hours and hours to just a few minutes.
Yeah.
So
but there's another story behind that too.
Okay, all right.
Because I had a fellow in the publishing industry one day say to me, oh, because they got one computer, they got what was called a CompuGraphic for typesetting, and I thought this was so exciting and so much better than the hot metal press. But this one gentleman said to me, I'd like you to close your eyes someday and run your hand over a page in a book that's being done with hot metal press, and then run your hand over a page that's done with something like the CompuGraphic. And so I did that. I closed my eyes and I ran my hand very carefully over a page, and the texture that page had, just the paper, the thickness of the paper, and that was one of the things I had to learn, was all the different thicknesses of paper and what you would use them for. But to run my hand over that page and feel the letters, you know, and feel the texture of the paper was exciting. And then when I went to the CompuGraphic typesetting page, I thought, oh my goodness, it's all flat, it's all boring. And as excited as we are about technology today, there's nothing like that. Oh, those old books, you know.
Fascinating. Cool. I was going to say, when are you going to retire?
I don't think I'll ever retire. I think I turn 80 this year, and I will work as long as this brain functions. And I think that's one thing that will keep me young, because I'm doing very complicated data analysis these days. And
look at that. Data analysis at 80, still doing this, or 79.
And I love it, you know.
As I say, you're also doing a lot of stuff in asset management, are you? Still? Or no, that was...
Well, yes, it is a portion of asset management.
Okay.
So, yes, I got involved in asset management. I've been doing a fair bit of work since 2014 in the oil and gas industry in Calgary. And part of that involved working with standards. Part of it involved doing business process analysis. Part of it involved helping people understand the importance of stakeholders and bringing them on board, because not everybody is going to be necessarily happy at changes that are forthcoming in their organization. So it's really important to understand where people are at in dealing with the new technology or dealing with these new ideas or new processes, whatever it is, and helping them grow from what might be a negative position to becoming a supporter of what it is that you're doing. It's absolutely critical, to have that understanding and to help people grow through that process.
Splendid. She's also still driving. Still driving, still working. Why not, right? If it works, why stop it?
And I'm also an artist.
I was going to bring that up too. So she does artwork on the side, and a couple of summers ago, you had an art show.
I did.
Outside your garage, and sold a number of paintings, oil paintings.
Yeah.
When she was younger, she taught me a lot about art. I haven't done artwork in quite a while, but and neither did she for many years because she was involved in computers. But a couple of years ago, when we were in the middle of COVID, she wanted to get back to artwork, and she had some breaks between contracts, so that's what she did. She went out and bought all this equipment, this art equipment, and spent her days and nights painting and painting and painting. Eventually, she sold a lot of those paintings at an art show. And much of her artwork was also commissioned. She had people sign up to have her do some painting that wasn't completed yet. And so she had maybe 8 or 9, 10 paintings that were commissioned?
I had about 6 commissions out of that one
Okay, there
summer.
you go, 6.
We had the artwork all set up on the driveway outside the garage, and people came by, and I was fortunate enough to sell quite a lot. And I set up a website, which I haven't really been paying too much attention to over the last few years.
She built her own website?
I built my own website.
From
right,
scratch?
From scratch, I did. Mind you, with the help of Elementor, which is an editor with WordPress. So I did have some help there with the software, but I did build the website myself, and it needs some serious updating, but I've been too busy working to get back to it in a little while, so I need to return to that.
Fantastic. Well, this is a great example of someone who has gone through multiple versions of change in your career, from being an art teacher and an editor. An art teacher initially, an English teacher, going into become an editor, going into computer programming, teaching at a college, and eventually becoming a trainer, a corporate trainer, traveling all over the States and England, and eventually becoming a consultant, which is what she's still doing today.
Right.
So it's been a huge transition, and still doing her artwork, and even got into web design. So splendid. Good.
It keeps me busy. It keeps me young.
Keep moving.
And always keeps me looking forward to every day.
And always keep adapting to change.
Absolutely. Adapting to change is so critically important throughout your life. There are going to be lots of changes in your life, and you might as well just get used to it and be adaptable.
Good. Fantastic. Well, thanks once again.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome.